Well, guys, it's been fun. We've got a couple more topics we'd like to broach, and I think one of them we look at back to the rotten R's, the rodents, the rodents and relatives, and what else is Spite
Dude,
else say?
dude, dude,
Yeah,
dude, when I first got in this business 25 years ago, we're, doing all the missionary work, showing the flag. We used to go to all the rental housing association meetings. And without exception, it always started off with, these are my units before my tenants, slideshow. These are my units after my tenants. And I'm looking, because I never owned anything because I can't make anything. And I'm looking at, my eyes are about this big, the app, it's like, I wouldn't go in there with a hazmat suit on. It's like, why do you do this for a living? Yeah.
well, my dad always used to, he'd buy something, he'd want to fix it up like he was gonna live in it, right? And I go, Dad, they don't care. I mean, it just doesn't matter. You get so mad. And I mean, I've when you buy an apartment building, typically you're going to go through, if you're a carrying owner, you're going to go through every unit, take a look at it, what's going on. Some of the units you walk through, you're going, really? You'll have a washing machine in the middle of the kitchen for some reason. It's just nuts.
Or better yet, these days, before they move out in the middle of the night, owing you 3 months back rent, they rip out the lawn, the wash and dryer, and they sell them online.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
We had a guy that came in, and he goes, for whatever reason, he went over to one unit that had been abandoned early in the morning before the sun came up, and the electricity had been shut off. And so he opens the door with his key, walks in, and he's feeling this crunch, crunch, crunch. And so he turns on the flashlight, and the whole floor is covered with cockroaches everywhere. Like walking on Rice Krispies. Why would you want to do that if you don't have to? Okay.
Well, or just standing there, you're going to court fighting for something, and your tenant's sitting there telling the judge that he or she's going to do everything they're supposed to do, and it's just not going to happen. And then they get out, they've stiffed you for it, and they leave all their crap in the place, and then you have to store it.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Yeah. You have to store
At your
it.
expense.
So yeah, exactly. So there was a time Tom and I had in one of our properties, we finally got the people out. They left all this crap in there, and our contractor, we said, look, we got to get this place fixed up, get it back to be occupied again. So we sent our contractors in there, and our contractors are like, we got to get to work on this stuff. We're just going to, get rid of some of it, throw it away. And so the tenant, the ex-tenant that was been kicked out came by, and he was threatening our contractors, you got to keep my stuff, giving my guys a hard time. But my guys had kept some of their drug paraphernalia around. So they said, well, I'm sure you call the cops to give us a hard time. They'll be happy to get this stuff, so go for it. But so this sort of leads me to, you made a comment earlier, Steve. You talk about, so if you look at the chosen asset classes in the DST space, I think about, so as I said, Tom and I started with rental houses. You typically go from rental houses. A lot of times people's first investment house is their home. They keep it, then they get married, then they have a kid, then the home's too small, they move out of it. So now that's an investment property if they're lucky to be able to keep it. And they sort of snowball that through life, and they end up owning a bunch of doors, but at some point they get tired or they can't deal with all this stuff, right? And if you look at the things I like about the mini storage or some of the senior living stuff or the apartments, you've got a bunch of tenants effectively, right? The mini storage is wonderful because you got a bunch of tenants without rent control issues to deal with, and the horrible tenants.
And they're month to month.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at this stuff, but at the end of the day, as you get older and you get tired of those dealing with all the issues of management, at the end of the day, people are typically going to either look at a big box single tenant building, or they end up, if they're made aware of it, the DST product. And I guess, and I'm dealing with this every day, as a guy that's lived with an empty big box single tenant building, they are wonderful until they're not. And I don't care who the tenant is. You can have something that's been great for 2 decades, and some new company comes and buys it, and within 6 months, you got a problem there. Mm-hmm. And depending on when that building goes dark, your ability to sell it or refinance it, and keep in mind that to have the loan requires insurance, and the insurance won't be carried for very long if it's empty. So now you've got this snowballing group of events happening that really put you in a tough spot. And that's where, when people are sort of A-Bing that end game versus an institutional offering like we've been talking about the DST space. I mean, so what are the sort of the golden child offerings in this space right now, and what do you guys offer versus that person that's got that big box single tenant as the end game?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple different things to keep in mind. So a lot of times, you will have a client that will say, well, why should I go into a DST? I'll just go find a triple net lease property and buy it. I won't have to do anything, right? Because it's triple net lease. Yeah. So they might work with a real estate broker in that situation to find a property. But those properties, number one, are properties that are being advertised and marketed to the general public, a potential buyer. Right? Yes. So you're in that situation, you're paying market price for a triple net lease property. If you're going into a DST where it's a triple net DST, the sponsor is most likely negotiated an off-market transaction, which means they've probably paid a better price than a market transaction that's open to the whole market, because they've gone into the seller, they've said, hey, we want to buy your property, it's not on the market. We potentially want you to sign a new lease if the seller happens to be a tenant, and then we are going to put that property into the DST. So the DST is likely getting a better purchase price than you as an individual would get on a market transaction, number one. And number two, you'd never see this offering because it's an off-market transaction that's been negotiated. The second point to make is that if you go buy a triple net lease property from a real estate broker, you're likely going to have a recourse loan, and you're going to have to likely personally guarantee it. If you buy a triple net DST, it's going to be a non-recourse loan if there's debt on the DST. So it's non-recourse to you. You don't have to deal with the bank if there does turn out to be an issue. The third point, like you said, if it was to go dark, and it can happen, it's unusual, but it does happen. Do you want to deal with it going dark if you own the property and have to deal, which you had to do, which you told me the story about, with the bank, with finding a new tenant,
and insurance?
Or do you want the professional sponsor who does this all the time to go find a new tenant, get it re-tenanted, deal with the bank if need be, and get this thing back up to speed, right, if it was to happen? So I think there's many advantages to buying a DST triple net versus going out and saying, I'm going to buy X property at X cap rate and do it all myself. And that doesn't even factor into the time it takes. And you only have 45 days to find that property and get that property locked up. And
get it financed.
And get it financed. And insured, and insurance is a big deal nowadays. And the other thing people don't realize is you might ID that property and think you're locked up. On day 46, that seller is going to retrade you if you don't have that property completely locked up, right? Because they know you've passed your 45 days and you may not have other options at this point in time. And we see that, and we try and tell when we're talking to potential investors and they're weighing that decision, do I buy my own property or do I go into a DST? That's something we talk about.
And I think the one last component is the fact that that loan is going to have to be replaced every so often too. And we're dependent. I mean, if you look at today's market, for example, a lot of people that had cheap money because money was free. And now it's probably where I would argue it should be historically. But a lot of people have not embraced that situation yet. But Bob, so how often does somebody come to you sort of with that menu? So if they're cross-shopping your DST offerings with other things, what are they typically cross-shopping?
As Steve mentioned earlier, at any point in time, the majority of DST offerings are going to be multifamily, and that is not because multifamily is a top-performing CRE type from a total return standpoint historically. Number one, over the last 25 years in terms of total return at about 15.5% has been self-storage. Number two has been senior living at about 14.5%, and I think multifamily just got eclipsed for the third spot at about 12% by industrial warehousing. But most people in 1031 exchange considering a DST are selling some sort of rental housing, whether it says SFH, a Plex, small apartment building. So they're already familiar and comfortable with the asset. And it's a much lower hurdle for the broker on the other side of the equation to sell you an asset that you're already comfortable and familiar with than to bring you up to speed on something that may have performed better historically, but you have little familiarity with. So everybody's looking at multifamily, and because triple nets, it's pretty much the default position for many people in 1031 exchange, triple net lease properties. And we work as hard as we can to steer people away from most triple net, at least most triple net retail properties, because you can make a very, very strong argument that that property is never going to be worth more than at the very beginning of that lease term, because the value in the property is the lease, not the property itself. So we try to steer people away from those property types, and because they almost always have predetermined rent increases in them, which at least recently have not kept up with inflation. There's very little in the way of inflation protection in those properties. So we almost always try to steer our investors to some sort of operating property, multiple doors, multiple tenants, which gives us maximum flexibility to increase rents over a period of time. And those properties, when they're sold, are always sold based on rental income stream. So if our management team does a good job and it starts cash flowing at X when you buy it and it's cash flowing at 2X when you sell it, that's going to afford you excellent inflation protection. And that's something that we just feel triple net, particularly retail properties, do not do. So most people are, because they're the things that they're most familiar with. The default positions are multifamily and triple net retail, and we try to educate people with regard to other property types and their desirability.
So when they come to you and they're looking to dip their toe in the DST space, what else are they looking for? I mean, what else? What are they cross-shopping in addition to the DST? I mean, are they just done with the other things, or are they looking at, like we're talking with Steve about the big box single tenant stuff? I mean, what is primarily the sort of, hey, I'm looking at a DST, or I'm looking at?
No, many of them, particularly with larger exchanges, are working with a commercial. I mean, the commercial real estate broker. Everybody other than Jesus Christ does what they're economically incentivized to do.
Yes.
Okay, and if a commercial real estate broker is selling a property for you, he knows that, or he or she knows that 9 out of 10 times you're going to do a 1031 exchange to avoid any capital gains tax liability. So 2 commissions is better than 1. So he wants to sell you a replacement property. So if they're working with a large exchange, they're usually working in conjunction with a commercial real estate broker, and if that's the case, it's almost always a multifamily property of some type or a triple net retail property of some type. We don't see that many 1031 exchanges outside of DST going into senior living, industrial warehousing, that kind of thing, because those properties, as Steve mentioned earlier, are harder to find and generally not available to individuals at the retail level.
Yeah. And just for everyone out there, I don't mean to put down big box single tenant investments or owning your own apartment buildings or your own mini storage, any of that stuff. It's all wonderful, and like I said before, real estate's the way as far as I'm concerned. I just think that you've got to look at what else is out there, and I think the DST is a great opportunity for people if they're looking to get out from under stuff and don't want to deal with it. But for the people that are prepared to take care of it and make it work, I'm a real estate guy first and foremost, always will be.
And it's great. We're just trying to motivate investors to explore their options and to broaden their horizons and consider it. And they might decide not to do a DST and buy a property. Yeah. Happens all the time, even after we've been working with someone, and that's fine. We know that can happen. I will say one thing about triple net industrial in a DST. Yeah. I do think there is a place for it, and I think it's a good diversification to also owning a multifamily or senior living or self-storage DST for a couple different reasons. There's the stability of the lease, and they usually have a 2% bump every year. So while it's not a bond, it has a bit of a bond, and it's not guaranteed. It has a bit of a bond type of feature that can help to offset the in the multifamily or the senior living or the self-storage that has some inflation protection. So it's a nice diversification. And I will say the triple net lease DSTs that sponsors bring out, they are properties and that normally have leases of 15 years or more on them. And so and they're likely going to be sold with 10 years or more left on the term. And that makes the property much more valuable usually because there's a second bite at the apple with 10 years left on that lease term. And that's what you want for the buyer of the property the DST would be selling. And then one last point that hopefully I hit on earlier was that often it's a negotiated triple net lease transaction that expert sponsor and experience in the space is important, that they have gone and negotiated a cap rate that is probably much more beneficial to them as the DST buyer, the buyer, and you as the investor, than the cap rate you would be paying if you're buying a triple net property on your own. You'd probably be paying a little more expensive cap rate as the buyer.
So you think about that time horizon, and you think about whether you're a builder, developer, or you're packaging these products. I mean, there's typically going to be a period of time where you're going to maximize your ROI, and it's going to occur before you start having to shovel money back into these things. So that's probably a part. I mean, you got loan considerations, you got lease considerations like we're talking about, you got just property asset considerations with respect to shoveling money in there. When these sponsors package these things, I'm assuming that they're buying it, doing everything they can to really make sure it's going to do what it needs to do during that.
Knowing who the tenant is, knowing the quality of the tenant, and they might know the tenant could be a big company or it could be a smaller company. But they might know the tenant very well and who the owner of the tenant is.
Yes.
Sometimes you'll find that a private equity fund owns the tenant, which is fine because their role is they're trying to grow the tenant to be as big a company as possible. So that's a good thing.
That's something I'd like you to elaborate on because we've had a number of DSTs recently where the tenant business is owned by a private equity firm. And we tell people until we're blue in the face that private equity historically has been the purview of the wealthiest people in the nation. And they didn't get that way by making bad investment decisions. So having a private equity firm behind the tenant is generally a good thing in terms of
because normally what the private equity firm, and look, they don't win all the time, but normally what they're trying to do is they're trying to grow the tenant, and they want the tenant to get bigger and bigger and become a higher quality credit rated tenant. And if that happens, the tenant becomes a higher quality credit rated tenant, that will increase the value of that lease for when the DST goes and sells that property with that lease attached. Yeah. So if the private equity firm is growing the tenant and the tenant is becoming a better quality credit-wise 5 years down the road or 3 years down the road, and the DST sells the property with 10 or 15 years left on the lease, they've created value in that triple net lease DST.
You can imagine, here, go ahead and buy it. You got a year left. You might have a hard time financing it.
That's right. That's exactly right. If you have less than 10 years left, you're going to have a hard time financing it. That's why I'm not going to say on every DST we have on the platform, but on several, the leases are sometimes 20 or 15 years. And some investors will say, oh my God, I don't want to be locked in at that rate. And it's like, yeah, you want a longer term lease because when you go to sell it, the buyer will be able to finance it. If there's less than 10 years left on the lease, it's going to be hard for that buyer to finance it, and they're going to pay a lower price for the purchase of that property that the DST is selling. So you want a longer term lease.
And I think that the point you made about credit enhancement is an excellent one. Back in the day when we did do single tenant, triple net lease retail properties, we did a lot of Dollar General stores before Dollar General really got on the map as a major national retailing force. And we were buying those properties all day long in DST format for 8 caps, and then subsequent They got a big credit upgrade from Standard & Poor's and Moody as they grew, and that really gave them a big bump from a desirability standpoint, and we were able to do very well selling those properties subsequently for investors because of that credit upgrade. So that is a significant consideration.
That's the real reason
Yes.
why. And we get into the details on the specific offerings when we talk to investors and we say, hey, here's the goal of the underlying firm that owns the tenant. This is what they're trying to do in the next 3 to 5 years. If they succeed, they will create a higher quality credit-wise tenant, and that will create value for the DST when they sell the property.
Great.
That's the goal.
So I think we're about out of time today. I want to thank you guys both for being here. You want to say who you are once again, and the best way, if somebody's got a question, can they get a hold of you? And also, I guess for the audience out there, if you've got questions on any of this or anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask those questions. We're happy to address those questions or concerns going forward. This has been great.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot. We've got a conference next week. I get to meet a lot more of your peers and learn a lot more about the product that's out there in that space. And thank you for opening up that opportunity too, Mr. Smith. But you want to just say something real quick? And
Robert Smith, Peregrine Private Capital. We're the oldest DST retailer in the nation. I'm the CEO and founder. You want to talk to us, 503-241-4949 or rs@peregrineprivatecapital.com. Okay.
Yeah, and you're going to be at our conference next week. We're going to have about 150 reps there that are all Emerson reps, and they're going to listen to presentations by approximately 40 sponsors. So that's where they go and get educated so that they can then educate their clients. So it's going to be a big and important and busy week. So we're excited for that. I'm Steve Mark. I'm co-head of capital markets at Emerson. I'm also a supervising principal. And you can reach me at smark, which is my first initial and my last name, M-A-R-K, smark@emersonequity.com.
And Steve is a really smart guy because I reach out to him all the time, okay?
well, thank you both so much for being here. I look forward to next week. David Moore, Equity Advantage, 1031exchange.com, and look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.